You're listening to The Artist Athlete, episode 72. This podcast is dedicated to CIRCUS. It's a place for professionals in the industry to share their stories, viewpoints, and information, and a place for everyone else to get a peek into this world. Hey friends, fans, and enemies. I'm Shannon McKenna. I'm the host of the Artist Athlete podcast and the founder of theartistathlete.com. Every week on this podcast, I do an interview with someone in the industry that I think is really cool, really important, has a really unique story or message, and has really made their mark in some way. These are really unprecedented times. I've been on lockdown here in Montreal for about 5 weeks. And in this time, I've been reaching out to a lot of people all across the globe who have been affected by the coronavirus pandemic. So people on cruise ships, people who have been stuck in crazy places, artists who lost work, artists who are making new work as a result. And I'm compiling some of these stories and putting them in a special episode, which will air next week. If you want to be part of this episode, please send some information to podcast@theartistathlete.com. Just send an email, be like, hey, I'm an artist. And my amazing assistant, my amazing human, my amazing brain, Hannah, will help you out with the process of getting some recordings. And hopefully you can contribute to our special episode. My guest today is the amazing Lisa Fa-Alafi. Lisa is a director, performance maker, choreographer, and designer known for pushing cultural and gender boundaries. Her work is visually stunning, highly entertaining, conceptual, political, and satirical at heart. Lisa is the co-creator and performer for the international smash hit Hot Brown Honey, fresh from their World Pollination Tour. Performing across 6 countries, the work has received massive popular and critical acclaim, winning the prestigious 2016 UK Total Theatre Award for Innovation, Experimentation, and Playing with Form. Lisa is the co-creator and director of Hive City Legacy with a team of femmes of color. In partnership with London's Roundhouse, this acclaimed work has gone on to a 2019 return season, followed by a UK tour. The Hive City Legacy concept has become a template to create a global hive, developing new hives in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South America, the USA, and in Africa. In this interview, Lisa refers to someone named Busty, and I just wanted to clarify before we start the interview. Busty Beats is her collaborator. Busty is another member of the cast of Hot Brown Honey, as well as Lisa's collaborator starting the show. And she's a musical director, composer, producer, and remixer. She's worked with Ben Lee, Powderfinger, Bone Thugs and Harmony, and is an all-around badass. I also, just real quick, because I know a lot of my listeners are from the US, wanted to give a quick kind of history lesson, as sometimes I am wont to do when called for. I didn't know much about Australia before I traveled there for the first time in 2016. And seeing Hot Brown Honey, when I came in contact with Lisa's show, was the first time I started to think about the issues that Australia had with its Indigenous peoples. So I did a bit of research for you guys. I got all of this from australianstogether.org.au, and I will put it in the show notes as well, so you can click around and do more reading if you choose to. But basically in 1788, Captain Arthur Phillip brought a whole bunch of people over from Britain to start a penal colony. So they were basically 1,500 convicts. They arrived at Sydney Cove, And in the 10 years after their arrival, it's estimated that the Indigenous population of Australia was reduced by 90%. The reason for this population decrease was the introduction of new diseases, that the settlers were just going in and acquiring these lands, and there were direct and very violent conflicts. People of influence at this time wouldn't even acknowledge Indigenous Australians as human beings, and they did this to justify extraordinary acts of cruelty towards these people. These attitudes set in motion events and policies and established systems and institutions that continue to have an impact on Indigenous and First Peoples to this day. The lack of representation has a historical basis in power through colonization. And because we don't operate in a colonized world anymore, these powers don't necessarily have to be there. And Lisa, in this interview, shows ways that we can get away from this and represent all voices in the circus and greater performing arts community. Here's my interview with Lisa Fa-Alafi. So, Lisa Fa-Alafi?
That is correct.
Yes. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming on. I always love to start by having my guest, which is you, introduce themselves and kind of talk a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Well, my name is Lisa Fa-Alafi. I am probably better known for being part of a collective called Hot Brown Honey, which I am the director and writer and also in it. We are a fierce collective of World First Nations women blowing the stage apart, I think, touring around the world, normally on our World Pollination Tour, which we've now reframed to our World Isolation Tour. And yes, so I'm a performance artist, director, choreographer, jack of all trades.
Hell yeah. And can you clarify, my audience is mostly, I have listeners from everywhere, but mostly from the US and Canada.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So can you kind of clarify, what is a First Nations people?
We, or Indigenous women, we I haven't really had to put this into words before.
I think we have the term here as well. We use Indigenous or First Nations, but
yes.
I think when I went to Hot Brown Honey back in 2016, I didn't know very much about Polynesia at all or Australia.
I think, the reason why we even discuss it at all is because I think in Australia, often there are lots of different nations from all over the Pacific living in Australia, whether first or second, migration over. So we like to say that these are our stories as World First Nations women who belong to those Indigenous societies. So for me, it's Samoan background. We also have Indigenous people from Australia, Torres Strait Island, and different clans in Australia. We like to talk about our work as what it's like to be from all of those different nations and be connected on land which we feel is stolen, the stolen land of Australia, and what those stories look like. So we just wanted to bring it to the forefront how different we all are from these Indigenous cultures around the world. That sort of answer it?
No, that answers it great. And what I think is so interesting about your work is I know a lot of people who are First Nations and representative, but their work is very much from their culture. I don't want to say that yours isn't, but you're taking a very modern approach to it. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, I think in Australia, as far as making work and making theatre or cabaret or any of the different art forms that we have in our show, because our show is multidisciplinary, I think we're often categorised together, even though we are all so different. So I think we were, in our show, we were pulling apart what it means to be Australian in a sense, which is like drawing from our cultural background, but we also wanted to talk about our similarities as women living in this country. So I think maybe that's where the modern approach comes from, is trying to find a way to tell our universal stories and our struggles living in here.
It's kind of like you're talking about being a First Nations people, or women specifically, Mostly identifying as women, yeah. In a modern world. So rather than like preserving a dance from Samoa or somewhere, you're taking it and turning it into burlesque.
Yeah, we're using the art forms that interest us to, tell our modern stories, I guess. I think there are elements of our, just our bodies being on stage, of course, we bring our ancestors with us and our cultural traits and our cultural learnings. And but, we're able to present them in any form. It's like any artist, most artists can delve into any idea they like, but often people of colour or Indigenous people are thought to have to only explore their identity. But I think we're trying to do all those things in once, is like explore the art forms, explore our cultural history now, and create conversation around that, I think.
Yeah, it's such an interesting conversation too, because I do think that there's kind of this onus on, I think about it because I am white, but I'm a woman, and even to be a female body on stage can be inherently political if you're presenting in a certain way. Yeah. Whether you're being overt about it or not. And so, I guess so the question is like how much of it is intentional and then how much of it is just by existing, you are political. And you guys and Hot Brown Honey, it seems like, has chosen to not only by existing be political, but actually take a very political stance and explore some issues.
Yeah, I think for us, it was actually being really overt, like, claiming space, that this is our time to shine. And actually, during our show, we try to subvert even theatre as a space, and by owning it as soon as you walk in the door, like usually we're standing at the door, we're welcoming people into what is now our space, our safe space to own and shine and celebrate. And we're asking our audience to celebrate with us, which I think is often, which we don't often get to do, often our image and our ideas and the way in which we're portrayed on the media, in the news, in film, in books, has often been molded by other people other than ourselves. And so we overtly using the time that we have this audience to almost make them celebrate us. In this 1 hour, we're all going to celebrate what it is to be in our skin. Not that anyone can fully be there, but I think we've some good old-fashioned hip-hop tools of call and response and actually physically making people stand up and make noise together for us is an interesting feeling to be amongst, and I think as the years have gone on, we've honed that even further so people can physically rise in a space together and understand what that feels like.
That's awesome. Yeah, I was reading a couple of interviews that you've given just to kind of do my journalistic due diligence. I love this idea of joy, how you're taught, because it's so, it is important to understand when you say stolen land, or the idea of colonization is not a joyful one.
Yep.
And so why did you choose to kind of bring out joy as the feature, the emotion that you want to have in your shows?
Well, I think there's so much joy in us as people, the fact that we're still here, the resilience of our existence. Like, we should be able to have joy in our existence. So for us, and like everybody's work is valid, and, we have had seen lots of work that pulls apart colonization and all of the horrible truths, from whichever continent or country you're from. But for us, we did want to pull it apart, but we also wanted to have these moments of joy because we need it for ourselves. Like, we talk about it as a collective and how we're laughing a lot. We have to make fun of some of these things or it becomes too heavy. So I think part of the process for making a work that's quite uplifting and funny and using satire and humor and comedy is some self-care for ourselves, to be able to have fun and laugh at each other and laugh with other people and yet still talk about what's important to us.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like those two things aren't mutually exclusive, right? To talk about important things.
That's right.
Have fun.
Yeah, exactly.
Did you start out as a performance artist?
Yeah, I think so. Okay. Like I did a theatre degree. I grew up doing cultural dance. Was my first experience and learning off MTV, I guess, MC Hammer and Janet Jackson and stuff like that. But I think once I did a theatre degree and I was trying to figure out where I fit, which I could clearly see wasn't like on television or in a theatre, any theatre company, or dance company for that matter. So we started making our own companies quite, straight out of university, teamed up with my cousin for one, and we still make work together now. But I think the work we were making, I look at it, I think it was heavily dance-based in the beginning, but I think we've always been quite political, because I think all the work I made early on was trying to deconstruct my own identity. Often artists do that. I'm from a multi-race background, so trying to figure out how I fit into each of those cultures. So yeah, I think I've always I look back at it now, and not that I had realized it at the time, and I don't think it was an intentional, but the work I made was definitely political in pushing boundaries around my cultural backgrounds.
I have kind of a stupid question, and I think it's a very only someone who has been an artist creating with so much white privilege could ask this. But what is it like to deconstruct your cultural background? Because I feel like this is an advantage almost that certain people have, whether it's through sexuality or because of their race or origins. There's a certain amount of work required in really understanding that I don't have. And I'm interested in hearing you reflect on what that was for you. Does that question make sense?
I'm trying to. What was the first part of it? Because I feel like
What is it like? Or what was that?
What was it like?
Yeah, what was that? Or what was that process? How did you come to terms with that? Because it sounds like you knew right off the bat that the opportunities you wanted on stage or TV just didn't exist because there was no representation for people of color.
Yep.
And so you reacted by creating your own work, and in that work started to understand your culture or understand you in relation to your culture. Yeah,
I think me in relation to it. I'm not sure how or why. I think, maybe it's I am from a culture of storytelling, as far as my, growing up doing cultural dance from all of the Pacific Islands, we often learn each other's dances and songs. So I think maybe, I already knew how to tell stories through dance, and that I think maybe it was a continuation of that. But I felt also from doing cultural dance, I also knew that as a performer, it wasn't enough for me. So I think I took those tools of that cultural learnings and sort of asked more questions about where I sit. I mean, I also knew that as a young artist coming out, knowing there's nowhere to fit, my cousin and I, who is also, he's Samoan as well, just looking at, where could we fit? What are the things that we like? Well, we have this background in our cultural work. Let's make contemporary cultural work. And we could see a market for that also, so it was lots of decisions. There weren't many role models or pathways. I think there were more in New Zealand, but this was before internet. So we weren't connected to those stories over there. So we were just making it up as we went along. And we liked humour and we liked multidisciplinary work. And we had friends that were circus artists or poets or, so we just made this eclectic work from influences around us. We learnt from other artists. And I guess to make it our own, it became wrapped up in our identity and the storytelling of that.
And so when did Hot Brown Honey come along?
Well, Busty and myself, we've worked together for over 20 years. So while I was making work as a young person, I was also being asked to sort of help facilitate workshops because they wanted to have facilitators that were from different backgrounds, So I started doing a lot of community and cultural development work along with my cousin. So we would go in because there's a girl and there's a boy, and we can connect to Pacific Islander kids and, help them tell their stories through dance. And, we were doing a lot of hip hop and Busty and I she was doing the music. We would write songs with the kids and then I would help them craft that into little routines. And so we did that for, on and off for 10 years together. We've been to communities all around Australia. And I think that helped craft how we make space for Hot Brown Honey. We were trying to make space for these young people's stories through, different arts that they could connect with, which were, popular forms like hip hop and their own dance. And they love a bit of hula dancing, I think that's where our relationship grew, and we learnt this safe space practice together, I guess. I mean, we'd always talked about, we've got to, when we have some time, we've got to make our own stuff, because I was still making work and she lived in Sydney, so she was making work as well. Yeah, it was about 5 or 6 years ago we decided that we wanted to do something bigger. So, yeah, we started these club nights, which would just like invite people to come and share whatever little weird, quirky cabaret, 3-minute item with us, until we decided that we would sit down and actually physically write the show. So it's been a long relationship together, our 20s to our 40s.
Wow, that's awesome. And it's so funny because I think of Hot Brown Honey as this very like sensual burlesque show. And it's interesting to hear that it came from working with kids and communities.
Yeah.
And developing.
Yeah, I think it's just like the next platform, isn't it? Like we always talked about, there seems to be no pathways for mid-career artists, which we were at the time, I guess, or a bit past mid-career. But yeah, we were determined to sort of see what mid-career artists were out there who just didn't get that next place to play. We were like, why can't we play the Opera House? Our shit's good. So when we sat down and write Hot Brown Honey, it was deliberately to make a work that could fit into those places, because we really wanted, we thought our work deserved to be like break down some of these big, the big doors to the big theatres, which I don't know, it was a dream at the time, but it's worked. We've played some of the most prestigious theatres in the world now. So yeah, it's been a
That's
journey.
Amazing. Congratulations. Well deserved.
Thank you.
So you did, in that first cast, did you just pick them from the open stage nights that you would have?
Yeah, we had some people that we'd worked with, most people we'd worked with before in some way or another, whether they were part of those first little club nights or they were people that we knew from working on the fringes. Like we would catch up at Adelaide Fringe and see, like, for instance, Ofa Fotu, who's an amazing singer. Like we'd run into her every year. And so when we decided to sit down and write a show, which we knew we wanted to have lots of different types of art forms as well as artists and backgrounds. So, yeah, we gave a few people a call. I think the only person we didn't know was Crystal Stacey, who is our circus performer. Because at the time we were like, we know there's some women of color performers, circus performers, but where are they? So we were introduced on Facebook. We invited, she was fresh out of Fruit Flies. It's like a circus school. So it was like her first year out. And we said, look, do you want to come for this 10-day development? We'll sell you our idea pretty much. And she's been with us 5 years now. So she's pretty much like learned this theatre craft along the way, So yeah, it's been pretty crazy.
That's so awesome. Yeah, this is a circus podcast. I have a theater background, but mostly I identify as a circus performer now.
Yes.
And I'm interested in hearing, like, when I started this podcast, representation was really important to me. And I have a couple of friends who are like, Shannon, where are all the Black girls on your show? I don't see any. Like, can you get some people on? Why do you think that there isn't more representation of people of color, Indigenous people? Why are there so many white people?
In circus or in general?
In entertainment.
In performing arts.
Yeah.
In entertainment.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's top down, really. I guess it's like, I got sick of the argument for me personally that, that our work is a risk, because more audiences are white or exactly. What does that mean? They were like, well, who is going to come? This is my argument with venues, and it's changing. It's slowly changing. But this is an argument I've had so many times over my career about us having to prove who will come to see our work. So when you're having this over and over, and the places where you can have work displayed, whether it's theatres or, a circus tent or wherever it is, there still is this gateway of getting in. Unless we have more people of colour running these buildings or running these tents or festivals or things, then we will always have less diversity. I think that is why we're not around as much as we should be, is because, and I've seen young performers who are brilliant burn out quick because you have to, I'm surprised Bussy and I are still in the game after this long because, it hasn't been easy. There's an element of paving the way or element of fighting the fight for the next generation, which is totally what Hot Brown Honey is about, even though, at the moment it platforms only 6 of us. But each time we create a new platform. We've gone on to make other works in London. We're trying to do one in Vancouver, actually, where we can share our space through, we've had a bit of traction and support. So why not create more space for other artists? Because we want to see more people that look like us in all of these places, so yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so do I.
Yeah. That's why this is great. It takes people across platforms, across cultures to continue to bring up these missing parts of our industry and how we can change it together. So thank you for reaching out to talk to me.
It's my pleasure. Because I'm also thinking, because your work does, maybe it's only to me that it has an educational bent because I didn't know about, I just came to Australia and was like, cool, kangaroos, Vegemite, weird time zones. That's pretty much all I knew about Australia.
Yeah.
I had no idea about the history. And of course, in the US and Canada, we have our own history, which is pretty terrible. Are you intentionally educational?
Yeah, we are.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
It's layered. We try to layer so there are things for our people and there are things that will only be understood culturally by the people, our nations that we belong to. But then there are all of these layers that are for base level people, base level understanding of some of these issues, even colonization for some people, So we really did want for them to access our stories to a point where we felt that they can rise with us. We felt there needed to be some level of education, hence getting them on board, hence seeing from our perspective.
Can you explain a bit how you do that in the show for people who haven't seen it?
I think they're just, I definitely think it's through the humor. Because, Busty has quite a lot of little dig side comments. Busty plays the queen bee. She sits atop a giant beehive and sort of she's the conduit for the word of the mother or in our mind, it's like Mother Earth, all of our ancestors tied up in that. So she delivers words and lines from amazing other matriarchs like Maya Angelou or, so I think there are little tidbits of information about that. So I'm trying to think of an example.
Yeah, what got me the most was some of the burlesque, actually, to show a brown body. And
yeah. It's funny because that's where it started from, because we were asking ourselves, where are all the brown women in burlesque in particular? Because, we play in these fringe circuits. So we were like, it seems like, and burlesque, had such a revival over the last 10 years. Because, I had no interest in being naked on stage my entire career, and all of a sudden I had, the proposal, Bussy asked me, he's like, you want to make a burlesque piece? I was like, fuck, I've never really thought about that, but okay, and then for me, then deconstructing that for myself. So my act is like a dusky maiden, island girl. It's a reverse strip. So I start almost naked in what people would consider the lazy island girl, weaving, basking in the sun, where I continually dress in an outfit that's all made of leaves. I end up looking like some sort of runway Lady Gaga island something by the end. But I think what was interesting for me around creating that piece was that, our bodies and Pacific bodies, Polynesian women's bodies, have been exoticized for hundreds of years, to take that space back and be able to own, the piece is very fierce. I'm owning my nudity. I'm owning, which is also a challenge for my own culture because we have been colonized to the point where there is a lot of shame showing any of our body, especially in Samoan culture. Religion and colonization means that we actually cover, you go to Samoa, everybody is covered wearing bikini is not acceptable even, you know. So it's interesting how while we used to run around just our tattoos were our clothes, now trying to take some of that back. There is no shame in my body. The shame that's on my body is through a colonized lens, and reclaiming that, which I'm telling you is I still struggle. I still struggle with fighting what is, you know, the cultural learnings around shame around woman's body. I battle that still, but I believe in it, so I still keep trying to do that piece.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to think about, because you also, like, within the artist, you have to think about all of those implications of shame and everything, and then what the audience also sees and the lens that they're viewing it through.
Yeah. So I have my own culture and their lens. I have the white culture and their lens. And how can I tell a story that feels like real to me, and, you know, whether I care about any of their opinions or not. But, you know, the way that I make work, I sort of think about all of those things. It's just the way that Busty and myself in particular make work and deconstruct.
Do you think there's more representation now than when you started? Like, what do you see for
definitely.
this? Yeah. Cool.
Yep. It's growing, which is amazing.
And is that across mediums like Australian TV and...
TV is pretty slow. Okay. I think, I guess I'm not really fully in that industry, but I can watch TV. I think our mainstream television here has still got a long way to go, and I don't think there's enough change makers in there. As far as theatre goes and different circuits in the live performing arts, I think the conversation has been amplified. It's still got a long way to go, but amplified so much that, you know, people are being called, like organisations are being called out on their diversity policies and programs. So there is a shift. They must address it now, even if some are slower than others. It's being discussed, and hopefully we can see some more change.
You've done this all around the world, not just in Australia. Yes. How do you find it performing for an international audience? Yeah, it's been surprising. I think the show that you would have seen in Edinburgh, we were really worried about that because, you know, it was our first time really overseas. We were like, I don't know if maybe it'll go down because there are heaps of English people there, and there is some understanding around some of the ideas, the Australian ideas in the show. But it actually hasn't been a problem. I think the interesting thing about our similarities of the fights and the issues and the things that we all work towards as women. So there's a lot in the show that other women or femmes can relate to, but then women of colour come in and we're talking, you know, we have a song in there that's like, don't touch my hair, and it's pretty much us yelling, don't touch my hair 5,000 times, like, you know, repetition is the key. So, you know, like and, you know, all of the black women or brown women in the audience are just like screaming and standing, and, you know, so there are enough of these universal, even though we're on different sides of the world, like, you know, the Indigenous story in Canada, for instance, or in Australia, there are so many similarities because we all have colonisation in common, you know. So we haven't had to change much at all, even in Sweden. No shit, huh? Wow.
Yeah, I think the only thing we did in Sweden was, you know, like we learnt a few words and, you know, tried to tee in with some of their political, you know, what that was happening there. But, you know, no, we essentially don't change the show when we travel.
And just because I can't help but to like bring up the times, how is everything going for Hot Brown Honey now that COVID-19 is a pandemic and shut everything down for everybody? Yeah,
I think everyone's been a bit up and down. Like we were talking about, it's only been 5 weeks or something, you know, like that it's been, and how many different emotions. Yeah, exactly. And how many different emotions we've all had at different points. So I think we got like a bit of panic about how do we now engage? How do we keep working? And we had that panic moment. Then we also had the moment afterwards where we were just like, you know what, just slow down. You know, we're not all of a sudden going to become like live online like gurus. So we just are slowing down, checking in on everybody. Everyone, of course, has different circumstances. The one thing we did was get the shop up so we could maybe have some income that might be as like an emergency fund for the team. But other than that, we're just slowing down. We're keeping our socials the way they normally are, like uplifting. Every now and then we have something fun on there. No, I think self-care, just check-ins, lots of Zooms.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, you guys seem like a really tight-knit bunch, which is really cool.
Yeah, it's good. And it's extended now because now we have a family in London where we made a show called Hive City Legacy. And then they made a show in Brazil. So there's another team there. So it's been great. We've been connecting like across the 3 countries.
What?
And that's been pretty cool.
I love that. Then I want to give you an opportunity. You have a shop up?
Yes.
People want to get Hot Brown Honey swag.
Yeah, we got all our merch, our earrings and stuff.
Yes, merch.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
And is that hotbrownhoney.com? What's y'all's website?
Yeah, it is. Well, we've been wanting a website. Our website has been under construction while we fight the patriarchy for 5 years. So the good thing that's come out of this pandemic is that we have the website up now. So
yeah, okay.
yes, it is.
It's a full-time job fighting the patriarchy, I tell you.
It is. We were like, who's got time to make a freaking website? Anyway, but we have one now. And we have our online shop. Yeah, hotbrownhoney.com.
Very cool. I have one last question for you, which is what advice would you give to yourself at the beginning of your career?
Oh.
And I'll tell you why I asked this question, because you've given so much good nuggets for people along the way. But I asked this question because when I started my kind of artistic journey, I didn't really feel like I had anyone to directly ask or talk to about what to expect. And so when I started this podcast, I kind of started it as like a letter to my former self, being like, here's all of these professionals from all of these different places, and here's the advice that they can give you. I don't know if that helps you with your answer.
Yeah.
But yeah.
That's cool. I mean, like, I think when you say that, I think there's the same as far as not feeling like I had anyone to ask where to go or what to do. So, but I think if I could go back to that time, I would just be like, trust that you are your own path maker. Like, just go for it, which I think I did to an extent, but I think I still had lots of insecurities around if I was doing the right thing. So looking back now, it would be just like, go harder.
Go harder.
Go. Yeah, exactly. You got this.
That's so awesome. Well, Lisa, thank you so much for coming on and talking to me.
No worries. It's been a pleasure. It's been a nice day hanging out.
That was my interview with Lisa Fa Alafi. As I mentioned in the interview, it was really important to get Lisa on the show for me and other people of color for the same reason it's been important for me to get trans circus artists on the show, or queer circus artists, non-binary circus artists, people who don't necessarily represent the majority. It's important for me to do this because I think about every week I have artists on this podcast. I'm an artist myself. Artists write to me all the time and talk about how we're all going through so much. We have all of this self-doubt, imposter syndrome, feeling of ineptitude, fear of failure, fear of success, the physical pain, right, of going through circus, broken hearts, relationships, contracts that have fallen through. We have the fear of disappointing our families. And I think about if I took all of those gremlins, all of that bullshit that's in my head, and then on top of that, I had an institution that was historically against me, and I have to argue with this institution to have my work shown, to argue with venues who don't want to book me because of where I come from, because of my history, because I don't look like the audience. In the interview, Lisa and I discussed this. We talk about how Hot Brown Honey and all of her work throughout her career, she's had to be very intentional and strategic about how to make art in a way that the majority population of artists, white people, just don't. In the interview, I think she makes this very clear that this isn't a point of attack or a point of sorrow. In fact, she's quite a joyful person to talk to, and Hot Brown Honey is a really fun show to watch. But it's just true. I think it's important that we bring that to the forefront. The whole conversation reminds me of this quote that I read from another woman who is definitely a hot brown honey, Miss Beyonce Knowles. She said in an interview with Vogue, "If people in powerful positions continue to hire and cast only people who look like them, sound like them, come from the same neighborhoods they grew up in, they will never have a greater understanding of experiences different from their own. They will hire the same models, curate the same art, cast the same actors over and over again, and we will all lose." That's the truth of it, friends, fans, and enemies. If all we're seeing all the time is whitewashed theater, whitewashed movies, whitewashed circus, we're losing out on a lot of cultural history, on a lot of stories that could be told, on a lot of people who could be celebrated. As this pandemic dies out, which it will, we have an opportunity to kind of rebuild in a new way and think about what voices we want to bring to the forefront. Because in truth, no matter the color of your skin or who you're going home with tonight, we're all in this together. And none of us are free, artistically or otherwise, until we all are free. To visit the fierce mamas of Hot Brown Honey on Instagram, fighting the power never tasted so sweet. They are Hot Brown Honey. The website is hotbrownhoney.com. And you can visit Lisa's Instagram site. She is Lisa Fa'alafi, all one word. As for me, for aerial training tips and inspiration, I'm on Instagram at @the_artist_athlete. My website is The Artist Athlete. And I am on Facebook. I am on Patreon. Patreon's the big one. Patreon.com/theartistathlete. Sign up. You can give as little as $1 a month. We're still sending out stickers. We've still got a lot of neat things in the works. It's been delayed a little bit, but that should all be coming out soon. And I've got some fun things planned for my Patreons for April and May. Super excited about it. New episode comes out next week. So if you love what you're listening to, subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. And I will talk at you next week, friends, fans, and enemies. The Artist Athlete podcast is supported solely by donations from people like you. Here's what some of those people have to say.
Aloha! My name is Beth Russell, and I live on the beautiful island of Maui, Hawaii. I am an aerial artist and movement instructor specializing in chakra yoga to keep me balanced and grounded. I play with silks, trapeze, lyra, rope, acro, aerial yoga and dance, slacklining, pole, bungee, and climbing. Really anything that goes up and allows me to explore 3D space. You can find my dedicated aerial page on Instagram at Maui Aerialist. If you find yourself coming to Maui, let's play.
Hey there, friends, fans, and enemies. This is Chris Alston, Patreon of the Artist Athlete podcast. Straps artist and lyra performer and acrobat out of Greenville, South Carolina. So if you're ever passing through, make sure to stop in and see me and my friends. We have a wonderful space, and we'd love to see you.
Hi, my name is Erica Lee. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, and I'm an aerialist. I teach performing arts to elementary school during the day and do pole and slings and rope by night. I really, really like the Artist Athlete podcast because it gives me a lot of circus goals to look forward to. It gives me a lot of insight on what's going on around the world in circus, and that's why I'm Patreon.
Hello, all. Thank you for tuning in to the Artist Athlete podcast. I am Opal Schwartz from Minneapolis, Minnesota. If you're ever in the cities, feel free to stop by the Aviary Minneapolis. It's a great time. With that, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week, and goodbye.
Hey there, artists and athletes. This is Andy Smith, owner and artistic director at Saltaire Circus School in Jacksonville Beach, Florida. And I want to thank you for contributing to the Artist Athlete podcast. If you ever find yourself down in Florida, come check us out. Whether you're an artist, athlete, or someone ordinary just looking to be extraordinary, we got a place for you.